All right, so ladies and gentlemen, we are very excited today to be able to invite, on behalf of the team here at JSOU, Dr. Chris Paparone, currently transitioning out of his role at National Defense University, but a sort of pioneering figure in the military design movement, a widely regarded and respected author on the topic, and somebody who's really helped kind of establish and push the discipline, and I'm sure he cringes when he hears me set it up this way. But he's truly one of these guys who have knocked down a lot of barriers and helped people think differently for a very long time. So we're very excited to have Dr. Paparone here to help us think a little bit more about how we might make some progress in the military design community.
Thank you, Nate. Appreciate it. Hey, what's really cool is having been here since Monday, usually a lecturer doesn't get to know the audience too well, but it's really an honor for me to be here, and I'm really impressed with the kind of thinking that's going on. I mean, you all are just blowing off the charts in terms of your creativity and some of the ideas, and I'm learning a lot more from you than you're learning from me. We built a course, like I said, when I got here, we built a course up at National Defense University using leadership as kind of the Trojan horse to introduce design. And we didn't achieve the level of practice in the classroom that you're getting here, which I really admire. I think the design of this course, the flipped classroom, is really, really cool. And I'm really glad to see that you're not just learning concepts, you're applying concepts as you're learning, which is really the best way, in my view, to learn. So my hat's off to the facilitators here. You really got some great facilitators. Sorry Ben couldn't be here. The great designer, the original designer of the course, which I really admire Ben and his work. But that being said, what I want to do now is, you like my metaphor? I'm sure it's been used before by the MISO guys, but what I wanted to do is really talk about this idea of designing social reality, which really is the profession of MISO, is designing the reality of others, in a sense. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but I think that's kind of what you all do. And I will tell you that I'm coming out of one of the subordinates, or one of the components of National Defense University. A lot of folks might not know, but we have 5 or 6 components. One of them is the Joint Forces Staff College at Norfolk, belongs to NDU. We also have the Eisenhower School, which we have alumnus here, and we have the National War College, and we have some research institutes. We have the Cyber School there for the chairman. It's the chairman's university. It belongs, he really, this is mine. he really likes to use his staff to make sure that we stay relevant, particularly the JSOU, to make sure we stay relevant to what's going on in the world. We don't get stale. So we have a lot of interest from the joint staff in terms of what we do every day. The Eisenhower School in particular is oriented on, as I was talking about earlier in the week, industry. And it's one thing to think about readiness to go to war at the unit level, but what about sustainment of the war over a long period of time? So what we're interested in the Eisenhower School is that sustainment view of how industry is prepared to support a longer war, sustain the longer war. And by the way, we worry about things like interdiction of long supply chains, or lines of communication that are strategic in nature, that we're kind of spoiled, that we don't really worry about it too much, kinds of things that we worry about in the school. So when the students do strategic exercises, they're thinking supply chain. They're thinking from raw materials through the manufacturing process, distribution, and then global distribution. How does that all work? Is it ready? It's not like looking at unit readiness where you have those nice reports. It's a lot more complicated because you have all these commercial industries that feed one another. Very complex system. I think it's more than complicated, it's complex. You want to go to the Kinefin model. So anyway, that's kind of what we do for a living. We took the approach for our course to use the concept of designing meaning. And the baseline theory behind that is what sociologists would call the social construction of reality. And this is kind of a quick and dirty class on the social construction of reality. During the presentation, I have about 19 slides I'm going to go through, so it's not going to be that long. I'll open up to questions. But you'll see a little self-development up there for slides to follow. And that means that those slides can be interactive with you. And we're going to post these to Blackboard so you can access them if you'd like. And maybe go a little deeper by clicking through it. Might interest you. What is the baseline idea that we're trying to develop? This idea of the social construction of reality? We've got to relate it to national security. So, the first principle is we want to think about the future, like you all are doing here, right? So reshape the way we fight or the way we think about war. And there are numerous kinds of views now that we're already at war in the cyber, net aspects, in addition to the counterterrorism and stuff that we're doing. But it's this war we're not familiar with. So, the idea of designing meaning into the situations that we're in now becomes hugely important. How about the means that we fight with? We can no longer think, not that we have in the past 20 years, thinking about military as the only instrument of power, the way we fight. We have to be much more inclusive and synergistic in our approach, not just with our own government agencies, but also with international partners and organizations that are not non-government. And then the rules. A lot of the things that we've got on stickies is the culture of rules restrain or constrain us from doing things that we like to do. But those rules had meaning at one point. The reason why they were established was because there was probably a lot of mistakes made or a lot of goof-ups that the rules came into play to add control to something that was maybe out of control. So, the challenge is to redesign meaning without destroying accountability, because our system of government is about accountability. That's why we have hierarchies, right? So you're accountable to the next level, all the way up to the American people. Okay, so in other words, continuously designing new meaning is what the theme is for my presentation today. So I go to the definition of MISO right from Joint Doctrine. I'm taking issue with the definition on two counts. That the objective reasoning is an assumption, and that behavior is what we focus on. And I'll go more into that why. So here are my 2 points that I'm trying to argue today. And by the way, I'm testing these arguments with you, so I'm looking for some critical responses or some critical ideas that come back at me. Behaviorism is inadequate, and objectivism, or the idea that the world is objective, is disputable. Those are the two things that I'm kind of focused on. So why did my origins of these ideas started when I was a cadet. My professor of military science, Stu Harrington, came off of the roof in Saigon in 1975, May of 1975, when he was one of the last guys out. He had come from a military intelligence background, and he worked on this operation this program called Phoenix. Some of you who are older in the room probably have heard of it. But it was it was almost like what we're doing today with bad guys. Only this program was based on turning people. So those that were involved in guerrilla activities or Viet Cong, they had their own system of governance within it. We were identifying leaders and trying to turn them. And if we didn't turn them, we took them out. So that shouldn't be foreign to what we do today, but we were looking at the political aspects of turning people's politics around so they supported the government. Ultimately, it didn't work, but Stu Harrington was very much involved in that. It was an interagency type of project. As you can imagine, there are other agencies involved. And he wrote a book, and he's written a couple books, as a matter of fact. He's still around. But this book in particular had a lot of interest at the time. He published this back in the early 80s when he published it, because he had to get some things out of his mind. So he basically wrote about the Phoenix Project. And over beers, when I was in college, he told a lot of stories, and that was hugely influential on me in the way I started thinking. And I think to this day, I still struggle with the ideas that he presented, and I try to make sense of them in a more, maybe a higher theoretical way, since I became more or less academically oriented. So, this is where I talk about behaviorism. One of the things in his book, he almost titled that book "The Asian Smiled," and the reason why he titled it, the publisher changed the name, but the reason why he started off with "The Asian Smile" was because when he dealt with villagers, he spoke fluent Vietnamese. He had, I think, this was his third tour, and so he became really pretty much familiar with the culture, the language. But he was deceived all the time by the smile and the welcomeness that he got in these villages. And the stories that he told was, these people smile at you in the day. They say, "Come in and have tea, have some rice," and they treated you like one of the family. And at night, they'd slit your throat. So he kind of got me to this idea that behaviorism may not be as like what we think it is, and that's what we concentrate on. It tends to concentrate on the military's behaviors rather than what people are thinking, and what is the meanings they're carrying around in their heads that might be deceptive in terms of their behavior. So I like to show this slide, and I reveal who they are. Right? They're all smiling, have bright faces on, but obviously not good people in terms of our missions. So this idea of changing minds means changing meanings that people are carrying around. So I'll continue here. So instead of just focusing on, I'm not saying throw behaviorism out, I'm just saying that you need to couple that with meaning. And this simple equation, I know it's oversimplistic, but the idea is, if you look at social action and why people act the way they do in social environments or with other people, it's both. It's behavior and meaning together. Behavior tends to be the objective view, so you can measure it, you can see it, you can observe it. The meaning is not, it's subjective, it's very subjective. And that's the creation of reality that the social construction of reality is about. So, I can't make a presentation from a war college without talking about Clausewitz, right? So Clausewitz, if you're familiar with one of his big models, is this Trinity. Thank you. Among the people, the government, the commander, and the army. And that what he talks about is these all have to be in sync to do well in war. Or, for the enemy, you want to disrupt this relationship. So, the idea of mass media now is to give a lot of speed to this way of interjecting into these relationships. And I think we're experiencing that today. You can see it on the news, you can see it on the belief systems associated with each party and how they see the world very differently. And so I think what's happened is this used to be a relatively slow process changing minds in this trinity. Now it's very accelerated, it's very fast. And this gets into mimetic warfare, memes, use of memes, things like that. So let me get into the theory. Here's kind of, I thought was a very good definition of theory of social construction of reality. So the idea is that people experience life objectively, but the meaning associated with that objectivity, so to speak, is really subjective, the meaning that you put into it. And I'll give you some examples as we go through. So in addition to behaviorism being something that's challengeable, so is objectivity. Even though in the military we're always taught to take the objective, right? We're not taught to take the subjective. And I would say that maybe we ought to start thinking along those lines. Instead of the objective reality that we're used to in physical warfare, industrial age warfare, that now we're talking about subjective warfare. So this gets into some theoretical definitions here, so I thought I'd throw these up. These aren't in the DoD dictionary, by the way. So, what this really translates to is, what you believe and what you see and what you see as objective reality may be very different from another person's place in the world. Here's some good examples here. The guy on Wall Street, how he sees the world compared to a Tibetan monk. Or the knowledge structure differs. And so the knowledge of a counterinsurgent as opposed to an insurgent would be a very different knowledge base. Some would call that epistemology, the epistemological base. Which, by the way, if you haven't noticed, what you are doing here is you're creating epistemology, an epistemology associated with the uniqueness of what you're talking about. I think that's a really important concept. So, this leads to a continuum approach to facts. So this proposes that there's a continuum of facts, that facts are not just facts. A mountain exists regardless if humans are on Earth, right? It's there. Now, where you start changing, though, is what that mountain means. So if you have an indigenous population that happens to believe that there are spirits in the mountain, spirits of their ancestors, then you start moving to the right. Because that meaning associated with that mountain is now subjective. Right? And so as you go more and more to the right, you get more and more conceptual. More and more creative juices start flowing as to what is going on here. So in technological facts, those are what we usually call artifacts, the visible creations of the culture. As you go to institutional facts, these are not so apparent, although they might have artifacts that represent things that are not necessarily objective. Here's an example. What is this? It's a piece of paper. Well, it's kind of cloth paper. But what it represents is value. And the only reason it works is because the person is going to accept it when you buy something is because they believe it has value too. So that's institutionalized belief systems that we create an objectivity that's really subject. Credit cards and the use of debit cards now has outpaced this. This is pretty obsolete now, especially with my kids. They don't use this at all. They use debit cards or credit cards. And then when you get to the end over there, then you're talking about real conceptualization, very subjective reality. So, to make this more military-like, I go from left to right. I give you examples of kind of hardcore science on the left side, the hard sciences, the natural sciences. And as you go further in, you get results of those sciences, the technological artifacts. And you keep going, get into military planning, military concepts like combined arms maneuver, you start getting more conceptual. Until finally, well, why do you fight? Why do you subscribe to the American way, or the history that you bring, your beliefs, the history that creates your belief system? I know we have a Marine in the audience. But I think that raising the flag at Iwo Jima has an effect on our meanings that crosses not just Marine Corps, but Americana, and how we think about our military. So those are much more conceptual. How about how we fight? We think, well, the United States in particular prides itself on fighting just wars, fighting wars that have rules. And these are important to us. These are very important to us. But it drives the way we behave, right? So, and the technologies that we create sometimes are reflective of those values and those norms. For example, we like precision-guided munitions, right? Why? Because you reduce the casualties that are associated with non-combatants. Well, that's a value system that drives that. So the behavior is not the most important part in my view. It's what are the values at stake? What's in our heads that drive us to those kinds of behaviors? So what I like to say is we've moved from kind of the industrial age warfare, which I think mainly 1800s to maybe through the 20th century, that we've now kind of gotten into what some would call postmodern warfare, the war of the narrative, the war of meaning and subjectives rather than objectives. So our territory that we're looking at now is that light purple area, but we tend to, in fact, in my school, we tend to focus in the industrial side. It's all about industry and how we mobilize for war through industry, how we mobilize people, mass produce soldiers, mass produce airmen, et cetera, et cetera. And that demonstrates the power of that particular nation. Well, we're moving into a realm now where you can have one person sitting at a computer that can access the internet that can have tremendous influence and effect in a warlike manner that changes the way we think. So, I kind of put that down now as kind of our area of influence, area of operations. Facebook, Flickr, Twitter. So, just some more examples. The idea that scientific facts demonstrate repeatable kinds of causality. The more you go to the right, the less causal relationships are clear. So you're not dealing with a science that has repeatable results. It's going to be very unique. You have to uniquely approach the people that you're trying to influence, getting into their heads. And every individual might have a different viewpoint, and now you're getting to the framework of uniqueness rather than sameness or replication or mass mobilizations that we're used to in industrial warfare. So our knowledge, the books, the journals, the doctrines that we write, we really should start looking, I think, at those as where are they on the spectrum? Our knowledge base is not the same. It's not homogeneous. So, when we talk about aerodynamics, we have a science, we have a hard science. As we go more to the right, we start getting more conceptual, more theoretical. So when you get over to the right side, you might have literature that you're not used to. And this gets to the idea that we've had in the course so far, this idea of transdisciplinarity, where you have to go outside your own discipline and you have to start looking at different ways of seeing things. So, reading a book on, probably the most famous book on bureaucracy, It's a wonderful book by James Q. Wilson. It's a very descriptive approach to describing what bureaucracy is about. You won't see a scientific approach. Well, if you do this in a bureaucracy, this will happen. He takes a very descriptive, rich view of what bureaucracy is. One of my favorite books on politics is Deborah Stone's book, Policy Paradox. You notice a lot of paradoxes we've been talking about here in terms of the tensions, the opposites. She's wrote a terrific book on explaining how politics works through this idea of tensions, values tensions, and how that works in a political science point of view. And of course, we have what's happening today. I think I took that off the internet like a week ago. The idea of facts versus facts. Facts are very different on the right side than they are on the left side. They're interpretable. What you see, what you observe, what you pay attention to is a matter of values. There are billions of things to pay attention to in the world. Why do you pay attention to certain things? And arguably, that's your value system. It's your ethics, your mores, your norms. So in short, you've heard this before. Words have meaning. On the contrary, people have meaning. Words don't have meaning. Because we objectify words when we say words have meaning. By themselves, they don't. It's only when humans use them do they have meaning. Okay, so one of the things that I did, and this is preliminary kind of research, is well, what's out there in terms of describing warfare on the right side of that continuum? And I found that a lot of the journals and a lot of the books written are attempting to make it a hard science, try and move our ability to respond to that right side using left side logic. So we try to be scientific in our approach of how do we fight this war. And if you look through these journals, you'll see a lot of techniques, TTPs. Well, here are things that work. And so we're kind of going to our comfort zone of a scientific approach to warfare. When I think, there are some things coming out now that kind of push to the right. I know you've heard of Like War. Has anybody else here read Like War? It's a really interesting book, published 2018. And it's really a journalistic report of what's going on right now, like with the Chinese, with the Russians, in this idea of changing meanings in people's social systems through social networking. Very, very good book. Although I will say that from an academic's point of view, a journalistic promotion is not the same thing as going deep into what sociologists call the sociology of knowledge. And that is, how do we create meaning in our social world? There are some real classics here. Some of these go back to the 20s. And so this is not a new idea. It was vested in philosophy, and then social philosophy, and then sociology kind of born out of it. But the idea of the social construction of reality is a 1966 publication that we consider a classic in sociology. And it kind of describes how institutions are born, and institutions being collections of meaning that those people in that affected by that institution believe in. And it becomes objectified. It becomes to the point where you take in subjective reality and you're objectifying it. That's the only reality that you can believe in. And then, of course, there are other books that have been published since. Notice metaphors we live by. A lot of the stuff that you do in here during the course is driven by the work of Lakoff and Johnson about how we create concepts, how we take old concepts, extend them into new concepts. They would call that metaphoric reasoning. And metaphor has a huge impact on design. You're designing meaning in unique situations. So, there's a little advertisement for the book. I actually pulled these terms out of the book on the airplane on the way here. I was like marking them and say, wow. And so when you know when you have kind of a breakthrough book, when you have a lexicon being born by the people who are trying to describe what's going on, right? Because the words that we had before don't work. But notice how a lot of these are metaphoric, right? So they've had like honeypot, like
Catfish.
bots. Sorry?
Catfish? Like, it's not up there, but catfish.
Yeah.
Like
So I didn't put them all here, but you're right.
Have you ever heard of catfishing? You see a movie?
Okay.
Catfish, but it's completely different meaning.
Right. It's not a real catfish, right? So the Angie Dixon one's really funny. That was a fake name of somebody who was posting stuff on the internet. It just, memetics just went and became millions of hits based on this fake person who didn't exist. And internal, and this is both internal and external. The internal politics of the United States is now being affected by this. I mean, the Republicans were really good at this in the last election, and using memes and memetics approaches to getting the word out or getting their position out. But it's also external. So this makes things even more complex as to what is real, what is going on here. We can be very affected by these ideas that are being memed out there. Okay, so this is kind of ending here, but I just wanted to throw his quote out here. I think this kind of gets to the big idea, is that objects, events, and situations don't convey meaning. We convey meaning on them, which means that we can redesign the meaning that we're placing upon unique situations. That instead of saying this is something out of the doctrine manual, we categorize it this way. We let the data drive our new terms, like what you did here. You first put the stickies up and said, and now let's put them in categories and build new categories. It kind of gets to this idea. So we can design meaning. So, going back to the original premise for why are we doing this, we see these as being the outcomes of a design program for education and professional military education. What are we after? We're after new concepts. We're after new designs of organizations, new designs of our knowledge base. And then policy. How do you design policy in this new world that we're living in? And as the world changes, policy tends to lag, right? So do we need a new framework for policy making? And that's the politician's realm. But our interaction with the politicians really matters. How do we help them understand what's going on? And how do we understand politics? And I hope to then open it up to your questions, comments, criticisms. John.
I like the continuum that you have, where you got nature on the left here, and then as you move to the right, it becomes more subjective. I like to think that on that continuum, that things are not necessarily fixed, like some are more fixed than the others. And the reason why I say that is I look at natural facts, and I think back on a video I saw yesterday, where it was on YouTube. There's a TEDx video where this woman trains generals for the Israeli military. Pardon?
Ofra.
Yes. Yeah. And I like a couple things. She says, measure based on what you don't know, and then they must forget before they learn something new. And that made me think of some work that my colleagues and I were doing with NASA. And what we did was we brought provocateurs, and provocateurs that are designed to shake people in their thinking, because knowledge can be a trap. And so what this person did when he was working with this group, which the name of the group was a biosignatures group, which is, in simplest terms, they were charged with determining life as they do not know it. And so when this chemist got up there to provoke this group of scientists, he said, the human race tends to be an arrogant race. What makes you think that life outside our planet is carbon-based? If you think it's carbon-based, then how you measure life outside our planet, you may not detect it, and it might be right under your nose.
The Heisenberg principle, right?
Yes, exactly. And so you see the natural facts. That might be something on the continuum that might be more fixed than the others, but it's still good to look at it as not something that's fixed. That maybe could move over here a little bit because our understanding of natural facts might not be applicable outside of our planet. So I guess my thinking is we should always constantly question our stipulation and our understanding of things, even if it's on that side of the continuum.
I would argue that's the basis of, we have a kind of a behavioristic view of things as a military culture. We want to measure.
Yeah.
Anything that's observable can be measured, therefore that's the reality.
Right.
When we miss a whole lot, I think.
Precisely, because these scientists, that's how they base their work, is on measurement.
Right, and we fought the whole Vietnam War based on the assumption that we can measure things that are observable.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's ironic that my professor of military science came out of the world that he says that's just not working.
Right.
And that's what stuck with me. And, but yeah, that's a great point. You know, one could call this red teaming. We call it different things in the military, but the idea of antithetical or an anti-approach to what we normally think, the way we normally think.
I would say if you, whenever I think about this type of information, I think the rise and fall of ISIS is a great case study for something like this. You know, who were they? Bunch of guys who believed in a thing, right? And they said, hey, this thing, it's normative facts, it's based on the caliphate, right? We're going to establish a caliphate, we're going to do the thing, who's with me? Well, you know, they were called many things when they first started, JV team and all this other stuff, and then they became one of the most prevalent terrorist organizations / mobile army in the history of warfare, right? And they went to how many countries in like a matter of months? They were in dozens of countries doing actual operations based on an idea, on a message. Hey, barbarism is in, we're cool, come join us. And you got people all from America and all these European countries joining their cause to...
Seems very countercultural.
Yeah, to go, you know, rape, pillage, murder, and do the thing, right? And it was all based on their belief, their motivation, what they saw as real. You know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They wanted self-actualization by...
That's that right side.
By reaching that, right? And, you know, the rest of the world sat back and was shocked. Oh, my word, what are we to do about this ISIS? And nobody did anything until somebody did. And now it's counter, you know, it's the other way around.
And it's probably not over yet.
Yes, it's not over yet, but just the fact is there's no more caliphate.
Because when you're fighting ideas, you're not fighting individual behaviors, you're fighting an idea. That's not the same thing.
Yeah.
It's very subjective, it's very mushy.
So I found it interesting when you throw Clausewitz's Trinity, which is a big deal that, again, every military school you go to, you know, with the civilian population being part of that Trinity. I would say in 18th century Europe, when a country or a province went to war, the people knew they were at war. That's what made it so key. They knew they were at war. As we go into more subjective war of the 21st century, I don't know if the population knows they're at war because it is so subtle. And if that is the fact, you know, your objectives and your targets or those you must defend have grown exponentially wider. Because we as an enterprise should only defend physical realms, but now we have to defend mental and cultural realms because those are things being attacked by those outside influences. So, you know, does the country know it's at war? Do the people know they're at war? And do they know their targets?
And the speed that this all happens is overwhelming. This thing should be spinning really fast right here. Each one of these should be spinning really fast. And by the way, one could be affected without the other one being affected. And
we don't
you get this disparity.
We don't need the people.
Yeah.
Because the people, if they don't know they're at war, we don't need them. Right? And their targets, and they don't know that. So as a Silicon enterprise, flip to the side, to our adversaries, that opens up the pool of quote-unquote targets, and how we can influence that.
Or maybe the metaphor is wrong, targets, right? We want to use the old language to describe the new. Maybe we need a new language. Because target tends to be an objectified view of behavior, right? And
Right, and it brings a lot of attitude as well.
Yeah, I would just kind of add off, I was thinking about that as well when you showed this. I think going back to since the all-volunteer force after Vietnam, there has been a divide between the people and the military growing. And now I think we're starting to see with some of the stuff that's going now on politics, you said it doesn't all equal, we have a problem. Even between the military and the government and the people. Because we argue, in here we talked about earlier, like 9/11 changed the world, right? I'm from Pennsylvania, I guess I moved back there, retired. I argue and tell people, and they kind of look at me, I'm right. After 9/11, and there was a plane that crashed there in Pennsylvania, then New York's right up the street, and DC's right down the street. There was no change in their life whatsoever. No change. They were at the mall the next day when President Bush said, keep shopping. I think we lost it there. And so they'd be like, well, why do we need to be in Afghanistan? Why do we need to be in Iraq? Or what did you do? You know, because they don't even have a military base to even conceptualize what the military does, let alone SOCOM. You know, other than we talked about TV, CBS series and stuff like that in here earlier. They see no change in their lifestyle since 9/11, other than a little inconvenience with traffic after that happened. And I kind of lay out, and now I think we're seeing with some of the things going on, we've seen internally with the government and the military now, right? Because people are posting things on Facebook when we were pulling out of Syria, how active duty officers, this is a horrible thing. We're leaving a Turkey for people, or the Kurdistan people, you know, to be able, I mean, wow. To someone, you know, who's grown up in the military before social media and stuff like that, to get on there and active duty officers to say that, I was like, man, we have a problem. And that's just on the conventional side. And then with some of these other things that have been happening in the SOCOM enterprise, are we disconnected?
And there's different realities. And by the way,
Yeah.
each one of those has different realities within them,
Within
right?
it.
So you make it more complex.
Yeah.
I got one back there.
So I want to go back to your original premise on continuously designing a new meaning and the idea. Recently, I've been exposed to an author from the 1960s, Herb Simon, in differentiating between the natural and the artificial. And what I see up here that you put is just that. And then to invoke P.W. Singer, which is an amazing author in his own right, where he started with the natural, did fiction with Ghost Wars, and now he's doing the complete artificial as far as this goes, because everything to the right, I think you've got culture up there, I think it's all artificial. I think that's the construct that you're telling us. You're giving us that, saying that on the left we have natural laws, and on the right everything is artificial, and there's an interface between them. My question to you is, if we're continuously doing that, I mean, because I'm trying to simplify it,
Yeah, good luck.
and the society itself is not interested in it. Using industrial age and postmodern warfare and labeling something because postmodern was a 1960s construct. I mean, are we really still in the postmodern age, or is it now a new postmodern? So, but it's all artificial, so it doesn't really matter because it's man-made. I mean, Weber says that, right? Everything's a man-made mental map of what you believe it to be, or something like that.
And
So
back-
are we just muddying the waters by educating in a way that isn't simplifying? By doing what you're saying here, concept design, policy, procedure, designs, by adding the ambiguity to these meanings that have meaning within our American, are we not ourselves trying to muddy the waters by doing that?
Anybody want to tackle that one? Anybody have an answer? I would say though that you have to look at why we're all in this room right now. We saw something that wasn't happening that should be happening, and that is design. And why do we need design? All of the exercises I've seen so far, I've interpreted as creating new meaning on situations that were wicked, some issues that are not just, you can't just simplify. You can't just take and make a simple cause and effect answer. You have to think a lot deeper. You have to build complexity with metaphors, like the airport one. I really love that one. But the idea is you have to find metaphors that work in new ways so you can have new insights. And even the word insight is a metaphor, right? You're looking in with your eyes, even though that's not true, right? So I think we have to get more conceptual and be comfortable working in the conceptual world. And by postmodern, I'm referring mainly to narrative, and that all of our realities are really textual. They boil down to text, the narratives that we carry around in our head. That's how we create reality. And we share reality because we're of the same ilk or culture, but not all the realities. That's why we have political parties and we have factions in our own society. But somehow we have a government that kind of is resilient enough to get through those times when you have those factions, except for during our Civil War, which didn't work out too well.
I guess I'm just trying to get to the point that it's all artificial. If we start with that, we can bend it a little bit more, we can mold it more. Because it's all man-made. The environment we live in is man-made. So I'm just, you know.
I would just suggest that that is the reason why we're here.
Okay.
And I think the idea of design has to go beyond just planning or campaigning. You're designing meaning, and you're trying to cope with ambiguity. And ambiguity means there are multiple meanings. That's what it means. Ambiguity means multiple meanings. So the idea of subjectivity is, well, multiple meanings means you can take multiple views on the same thing, or the same idea that you're talking about. And it's better to have multiple views than a single view. Right? Because if it's subjective, the more angles that you look at the same thing, the more insights you gain for that phenomenon that you can't really see. It's not objective. John.
Yeah, the way I see it's using this to recognize that the water is muddy.
Okay.
And two, it's also about increasing my tolerance for that water that's muddy. And three, I think it's important, what's a big takeaway for me is how much I need to keep my emotions in check. Because it could take me away from you meaning and you understanding. And here's what I mean by that. You use the word bad. You coin something as bad. And I get this when I go to Columbia, and I can speak to the culture because my parents were born there and I do a lot of work there. But sometimes I get into these debates with my cousin. It says, you think we're the problem because we bring up the coca crops and we traffic it. And they tell me, do you ever think that maybe you're the problem because you have a demand? And the more the demand is there, the more causes on our end to grow these crops and to actually supply the demand. And so how do we define malevolence? Now, from my cousin's perspective, malevolence is defined as demand that comes from the US side. On the US side, malevolence is based on you raising these kind of crops, you know? So I had to step back and put my emotions in check to gain a new meaning from my cousin's perspective. You know?
Yeah, I kind of built this chart based on what you're talking about, and it's real easy to define the evil people in history and the really good people in history. The problem is right there in the middle, where, okay, so you're going to tell somebody not to use plastic straws. You're going to outlaw them. You know, do you dictate that, or do you allow people to come up through an education process, perhaps? You know, so that gets to policy. What kind of policies do you set that don't take away freedom at the same time you're taking away freedom? It's almost the paradox, the problem. But these dilemmas are where things get really fuzzy, and they get. I mean, it's very clear the good guys and the bad guys, but when you get in that middle realm, you start realizing that factions in your own society are built around these belief systems about what to do about problems and what problems to pay attention to.
Yeah, but I think what John's saying is that they're seeing evil and moral exactly opposite. So there's not a dilemma in that scenario from what I'm hearing his cousin say, right? The dilemma is that we've made this illegal, but we still have the highest demand, and they're evil because they're supplying it. And he's saying, well, I wouldn't supply it if you didn't want it.
It's not like the drug problem in the United States.
It absolutely is, but it's how is that a dilemma in the middle, like a
Well,
straw?
It becomes a policy fight, right? What's the right
I don't think
policy?
it's a
Yeah,
policy.
and I think the point that my cousin
I
also
think it's
made
evil
is that,
and more, like,
is that
that's what-
the way that Americans depict Colombians, just look at the movies.
Right.
And that's unfortunate, because you're not missing that it was a Colombian that won the Tour de France, right? That we have great coffee. Why don't you talk about that? You know, and by the way, spell Colombian with 2 O's, not with a U, and Nixon did that. And that's how he gave a gift to us, and it had a U in a Columbia, you know? So we're minimized, you know, and so it's.
And I understand that you have evil and moral right there, right?
It's not that easy. This was
Exactly.
trying to say it's not easy to.
Right, and so when you're at war, because we consider ourselves on a side of the rule of law, we consider that as moral. And we've based this whole sovereign and non-sovereign states on this concept. And I'm not arguing it, I'm just saying, there's also this dichotomy in that argument, like when you go to war too, so.
I agree, and I think like right now, the two political parties that are duking it out right now in our national capital, one thinks the other is toxically manipulating things, right? So they really believe they have a moral stance that's immoral.
Do they believe they're right, or they just like to argue?
Maybe both.
I think it's both. I don't.
Well, they're doing exactly what you said, continuously designing new meaning. And what they're trying to do, like most social media, is trying to promulgate that new meaning to the population for gravity, for acceptance, for further promulgation. I mean that's just standard messaging 101.
You move.
Every time. I'm focusing on everything you say now, Mark.
So to build on this, I think we cite, there's a philosopher who I think got there first, who writes about this, the modern media landscape in the context of the Gulf War, and he wrote a series of 3 essays. The Gulf War will not happen, the Gulf War is not happening, the Gulf War did not happen. His best known work is called On Simulation and Simulacra, which inspired the movie The Matrix. His name is Baudrillard. So if you want to kind of get a feel for what this looks like in a military context, and in particular, I think to build on Tommy's observation about the dead Carl and the Trinity there, disconnection of people in the government, that media landscape of people, and to JC's comment, most people will never experience war. You're only going to experience a product describing war. And in the world we're in now, it'll be a television clip or it'll be memes. And right, but that becomes a lived experience, independent of the behaviors that are happening somewhere else in the world. So that most people will never know that you're constantly at war. How many people know that around the world, SOF is in how many countries at any point in time?
78.
Right? So all of this is happening, right, in objective reality. But the lived experience, subjective reality of most people in the world, including the population of the country, which supports the military, and technically we work for, or you work for, right, is very different from the lived experience of people who are involved in those behaviors. So I would argue that the Trinity still exists, but the dynamics have changed. And that's probably an opportunity to go deeper. If anyone's interested, Baudrillard's essays on the Gulf War do a pretty good job of seeing around a corner to see that this is coming. In the interest of time, let me throw a closing question out to you, because I know you've spent a lot of time tracking this movement. You've contributed a great deal of publication and scholarship on the topic. You've designed courses on military design and leadership at NDU. You've seen where it's gone well, you've seen where it's kind of gone off the rails a little bit. And then you've been a guest observer in this course for a while now. I'd love to know kind of what has piqued your interest or sort of sparked your curiosity what got you excited so far this week about what JSOU is doing or the military design movement here?
I think what impresses me is the design of the course turns it over to the students. And the facilitation is just there to facilitate, some question asking or some nudging, gentle nudging. But the learning really is vested in them teaching each other and showing each other's ideas, which to me is the height of adult education. I mean, when you think about it, this is nirvana for adult education, where you introduce creativity, you throw a little science in. That's where the facilitators come in very nicely. They say, oh, by the way, did you think about this? Or did you think about the next step? Maybe take it another step, and maybe confine a little bit more, or open up a little bit more. So I think that combination is a great mixture, and I don't think that our PME programs do this. At least the majority of the ones I've been associated with, whether it be JPME or service-oriented PME, I don't think we accomplish the kinds of learning that happens here. And what really is cool is when you all leave here, you'll reflect on this. And this becomes a metaphor for future learning, and you extend it out and say, well, I could take some of those ideas I learned there and maybe extend it out into what I'm doing, what I'm practicing. And at the same time, also honoring the ideas that don't get fixated, because the world is subjective, we've created it, we objectify it, or we go through the process of objectivation. I know that I can go back and realize that it's subjective and then change the meaning. That's profound. And I think that's one of the outcomes of the way you've designed the course.